Hey, welcome to Transform Your Workplace. It's Brandon Laws, your host. This episode is brought to you by Xenium HR. Xenium is supporting small and medium-sized companies for their training and development, compensation strategies, payroll processing, and HR consulting. Learn more about Xenium at xeniumhr.com. This episode today is a fun one. I have a conversation with Cindy Baker. She's the author of Rockin Life From Home, Successful Strategies to Balance Family Life and Working From Home. So for you working parents, or even for those that have never worked from home and all of a sudden now you're working at home, this episode is for you. So we talk about the dynamics now of working from home and how it's different than being in a place of work. And we just really in this episode talk about all the tips and tricks for making working at home a little bit better. How do you separate the two, work and life, to stay present, be happy? Enjoy the episode with Cindy Baker, and I'll talk to you next week. Cindy, it is a pleasure to have you on the podcast. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
We're going to talk about working from home. So what's your story? Have you been working from home for a long time? Like, how did you become an expert in this area and share a lot of tips around that?
Well, I've been working from home. I was doing a combo, actually, working from home over the past 10 or so years and going into an office. But over the last couple of years, I transitioned into working from home full time. So I've been doing this for a couple of years now. So I was already kind of ahead of the curve when everything happened this year, interestingly enough. And there were so many people. My sister, her company, everyone had to start working from home, and everyone was bending her ear in her team saying, okay, I'm working from home. I've got my kids right here. I can't get my work done. I'm not used to this. And they were stressing out. And she told me about it one day. And I thought, well, I've been helping people for such a long time manage their stress. And that really provided the idea of writing this book, Rockin Life From Home.
Mm-hmm. In what ways are the dynamics of working from home different than being able to go to a place of work? Like you mentioned, working, I got my kids next to me. Like what's in your mind, what's the biggest difference between like going somewhere to actually work versus like you're working at home and it sort of like blends in with everything?
Yeah, I think the boundary issues are different. When you leave your home every day, you go to an office, it creates that physical boundary. But when you're at home, you're really blending, like you said, everything. You're multitasking, moving from family to meal times to work to conference calls and back and forth. And it's a challenge for people to be able to manage all of that, especially when you've got some people who have very, very young kids at home right now that they are not used to taking care of full time and working full time. It presents a new challenge in that way.
In your book, you'd mentioned that journaling could be really therapeutic and just really good for working at home and just maybe jotting down some thoughts. So like, what are your thoughts about journaling and maybe some methodology around like how to make it really effective for somebody?
It's an excellent question. I think, journaling is one of those things I've been doing for, goodness, probably 15, 20 years now. And I don't journal every single day, but when I feel like I really need to process some things that are going on in my life, I turn to my journals. I have several of them all throughout the years, cataloged and so forth.
Do you handwrite?
I do handwrite, yes.
Okay.
And I don't write like in full sentences. Sometimes I do.
Oh.
And sometimes I just get creative and put words on a paper. I might doodle. So there's various ways that you can journal. A lot of times people feel pressure because they don't know where to start. But when you're using it in this capacity, it's like, okay, I'm feeling frustrated. And we have over 60,000 thoughts going through our head a day. And that's a lot of thoughts to manage. So when we're able to really just kind of think through the process and expressing it through a written word or artistically through doodling and so forth, it allows us to fully process the emotions and the thoughts behind it so that we can release it. And it also gives us some clarity moving forward. Sometimes we're surprised by what comes out when we're writing something down.
I have the hardest time with journaling. Like, I can't find a structure or a cadence to it. I find myself wanting to write during key moments of whatever's happening, like if I'm having a hard time, but I also want to remember the good times and the good things that are happening. So is there any sort of structure that you feel like throughout your day, if you're, maybe I'm sitting here working, but like I'm going to carve out time to journal. And is there a good structure to it, like free flowing or in bullet points? Or like what works for you?
I think free flowing is great. Whatever's coming into the mind, I think a lot of times we judge our thoughts and then we react from them versus saying, I'm just going to allow whatever comes into my mind to come into my mind. And I'm going to also allow it to flow out of my mind. And that's what stumps people. Because usually if you have a thought, you tend to hang on to it and then you react from it versus if I'm going to just observe these thoughts coming and going. So when you journal things like that, it allows you to say, hey, I'm feeling stressed. What can I do to help myself? And so feeling grateful can also help negate stress very, very quickly. And so I find that for me, I'm pretty eclectic in my approach to journaling actually, and I do it based on whatever I'm needing. If I have a gratitude journal that I use consistently too. I have kind of like affirmations that I use based on whatever goals I'm wanting to achieve in both my personal and my professional life. So there's so many different ways, and I think it's important that people find their own groove to it, find what works for them.
Do you have a journal that's like predefined in the way it's laid out, or do you just use like a blank like composition notebook or something and just write?
Oh yeah, mine's blank. Yes. Yes. That way I can bring my own creative element to it without someone dictating what I should be writing
I
down.
love that. So it's interesting because I also, like, you can see this, but listeners can't see this. I have one of those blank composition notebooks, and in the last couple of days, I go through these modes of I want to write down what I'm grateful for and journal and stuff. So the last couple of days, how I structured mine was 3 things I'm grateful for, 3 things I'm looking forward to this week or today, my to-do list, and then I'll write down like free flowing notes if I have anything that comes to mind. So am I thinking about it the right way? I mean, would you structure it differently or give me different advice on that? Or is it too much like all on one piece of paper?
I think you have to find what works for you. I think as far as the approach, though, if you do this over the course of, a week or two, and you find that it's not overwhelming, and that's the key, it's something that you look forward to versus something you feel like you have to do. And that's one thing with journaling. People tend to have like a predisposed approach, like this is the right way or this is the wrong way. And it really is very tailored to each individual. Some people may love to write volumes every day. Some people will hate it. So you've got to find what works for you. But journaling will allow you to really express what's on your mind, get clarity, and also keep in front of you your goals and what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah.
So you can use it in different ways.
And that's a great point, because what I was going to ask a follow-up question to that about, like, okay, if you step back and look at what is journaling going to do for you in regards to working at home? And I think that it keeps your eye on the ball, right? It keeps you in front of your goals at all time. And I think that's the hardest thing for anybody when they have goals. They just like stuff it away in a drawer and they forget about it. But when you're journaling and thinking about that goal as the kind of the end game, whether it's a week or a month or a year or 2 or 3 years, it's always in front of you. So is that how you think about journaling and what it can do for you at work?
Exactly. If you have that journal right by your computer and every morning you get up and you just flip to your agenda, your goals, or things that are most important to you in your life, it could be even reviewing your gratitude list. That's going to set your day up right.
Yeah. On the gratitude note, because I love this, I love gratitude. I'm a grateful person, and it's always nice to kind of like flip back through and see what you're grateful for in the moment. But what kind of stuff is on your gratitude list, if you don't mind me asking a very personal question? But I'm curious how you think about it.
Yeah, I think one thing I'm always grateful for is no matter what's going on, I'm grateful for life. And I'm grateful for the people that are dearest to my heart. And I'm grateful really for every single day. When I'm talking and I'm coaching and I'm counseling my clients, and I say, over a period of time, if you get up every morning and you expect to have a good day, or you expect whatever happens that day, you're going to be able to manage it. Okay. But a lot of people don't. They get up and go, okay, here's another day. And that puts you in a very reactive negative tone for your day versus gratitude. You're having something, if you glance on your gratitude, you say, I'm grateful for just being able to breathe at this moment. I'm grateful for all the tiny, tiny things. I'm grateful for being able to move. I'm grateful for being able to work. I'm grateful for being able to have food in my pantry. Those kinds of things, it builds. And if you do that over time, you create these wonderful mental habits that are going to propel you into living a more fruitful life.
Yeah, that is why I love gratitude so much, is because what you just described with like getting up and just going on with your day and going through the motions, it's so easy to do that, especially when you're working at home, that it's easy to never look at the beautiful things around you or the good things that are happening to you and just be stuck in this rut of work and making dinner or doing stuff with the kids, with their school at home. And so I love that, especially when you reflect on it. How often do you go back and look at things that you're grateful for?
I would say several times a year I go through my old journals and I reread
Wow.
them, and it brings it to the forefront because some things that you forget. So that's one
Right.
thing nice about journaling is when you write it down, there it is in concrete. You are talking to yourself, and there really isn't anything more powerful than that.
Yeah. You're a proponent of lists, I think. You mentioned it in your book. Curious, how long should a priorities list be? And how do you structure lists?
I actually structure mine. I'm always asking myself, what can I manage in a day? What is reasonable and realistic? Because I want to feel successful at the end of each day. I don't want to feel overwhelmed. I want to feel like I really accomplished things. And we are people. We like to accomplish stuff. We really do thrive on being able to attain things and move forward and see that success. So keeping your list manageable, which really means a small list. And most Americans like to have long lists. You got to shorten them. Yeah, so I would say, depending upon how long each task will take, you probably want 5 to 7 if they're lengthy, or if they're very, very short, 8 to 10 lists. And then you can always add on. If you get done early, celebrate, and you can take on
Yeah.
some more stuff if your energy permits that.
Yeah, I love that. What I tend to do is, because I don't want to forget things, I will write a huge long list of like, okay, here's what needs to be on my radar. But when I'm just focused on that for the day, I oftentimes don't know where to start. And so on the good days, I'll do the big list, but then I'll make a second column and I'll say, okay, these are actually the 4 or 5 from that big list that I'm doing today.
Yes.
And if I could do any more from that list, great. But otherwise, I just try to focus.
Well, that's a good approach.
Is that a good approach?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
That's a good approach because that way you have your long list, these are things that you have to accomplish, but you're pulling out of that the main things for that day.
Yeah.
So the key is not to stare at the long list every day, but focus on that smaller task list that you create.
Yeah. Since we're on the subject of time management, I'm curious what maybe 2 to 3 tips that you have that you mentioned several in your book about time management, because I feel like when you're working at home, it's so easy to just, oh man, the dishes need to be done, or fold some laundry, or oh, yeah, I'm going to go, hang out with the kids for a second, or just whatever it may be that, comes up at home. So how do we get people, listeners of this podcast are leaders, but there's also some individual contributor level people. So they may need to help their people with time management, but I'm sure everybody can learn something. So what tips do you have to share about just ways that we can manage our time more effectively?
Well, the first thing I would say is chunk down your time, which means if you're going to work a standard 8-hour day, you want to create chunks of time and then manage the time within those chunks of time. Instead of looking at the whole day, you alluded to making a list. Well, take that short list and say, okay, what's the most important now? What do I need to do? But more than that, too, is also what does your day look like, and what time frame is most likely available to complete that task? When are you more likely? And also to consider your energy level. If you're a morning person, tackle your hard stuff. That would be my second tip. Tackle your hard stuff first and get that out of the way. Oh, that's me. I can do stuff. I'm strong in the morning, and then the afternoon I start to fade. So I do a little lighter stuff late in the mid-afternoon. So I organize the time also based on energy level when I perform my best.
Where are you at? You're in the East Coast, right? So
Yes.
like Georgia.
Yes.
So you're 3 hours ahead of me. So you're at like 1:17 p.m. What part of the energy level are you at right now? Did you just have lunch and you're about to go
I sure did.
you going to go take a nap right now, or?
I'm on my mid-range right now, but like 3 or 4 is my worst time. That's when I want a nap.
Yeah, you seem sharp though, so I'm just giving you a hard time. So you talk a lot about mindfulness, both in your book and on your blog. You've got so many tips around mindfulness. How do we stay present and replace the negative thoughts and decrease our stress? I mean, that's really what I believe mindfulness is meant to do, is to make us less anxious, less stressed. What are some tips for people working at home? How do they be more mindful?
Well, interestingly enough, our mind will jump from the past to the future to the present. And most of us stay more in the future or the past versus the present. And the only power we have is in the present moment. So, one thing about mindfulness, which is so helpful, and there's so much studies and research based evidence that this does help reduce stress, is we are most empowered in this moment. And if we can practice mindfulness, which is basically training our brain, if you will, to stay more present. And when we do that, when we're really present, we're in a state of observing. And when we're observing, we notice what thoughts we're having. And when we quiet our mind enough to notice what thoughts we're having, then we can quickly delineate, is this a thought that's helping me? Or is this a thought that's hurting me? If it's hurting me, I can let that go. I'll allow it to come and go out of my mind. And I will choose on purpose another thought that's going to be helpful to me instead. And that can help rule out a lot of like the worry about the future or dwelling on the past, just that practice of daily mindfulness. And there's lots of different techniques you can do to practice mindfulness. And you don't have to sit there and carve out 20 minutes out of your day to meditate. Research shows 1 to 2 minutes can actually help change the brain chemistry in our mind, which is really, really helpful. So you can practice mindfulness when you're doing simple things like making a cup of tea or brushing your teeth, or you're in the shower. Instead of running through your to-do list in the shower, you actually be in the shower. Pay attention to what you're doing.
Pay attention to the water splashing against your face and your body. Yeah, that's interesting. Just on that note, so last night I was having a hard time going to sleep, and I'm laying there, and then I have one of those Apple Watches where you can do the breathing exercise thing where, I don't know if you know what the app thing is, but it'll vibrate and then it'll expand like a circle, but you can feel it sort of like going out, and your breathing is supposed to match that, like, so out and then in. And so I did that for like 3 minutes, and I found myself, because I had so much on my mind about work and, like, as you said, the future. I'm not a dweller on the past, but like I'm a future state guy, so anxious about what's happening. But I found with the breathing exercise, I was so focused on my breath and then when my mind drifted a little bit, I just brought it right back to the breathing. And so it would, like, to your point with anything like taking a shower or making a cup of tea, if you bring it back to like what you're doing in the moment, it's really powerful. But you have to be cognizant of like that moment. It's just hard, but if you could bring it back to center, then I think you could stay present.
Absolutely.
Any experiences with that?
That's exactly right. And that's the one thing, if you take, a minute or two throughout the day and you do that, you're actually strengthening your capability to stay more present.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you're changing that neural network in your brain. That ability. It's like a skill set like anything else.
Yeah, and I think that's why if you practice it even like every day for a couple minutes, like that's practice.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
It will strengthen that skill. I love that. So you mentioned like chunking time for time management purposes, and I'm curious if you ever build flexibility in your schedule for dealing with life as it happens. I mean, we're working at home. Things are likely to come up. I've got kids at home, so things inevitably come up where flexibility is really nice to have, like not having meetings back to back to back. So if I need to make lunch for my kids and give my wife a break, I can do that. What's your thought on just building flexibility throughout the schedule to make sure that working is a little less stressful?
Well, I think it's a great question. And I do reference that in my book too, about having a flexible mind. And that ties in nicely to what we're talking about with setting goals, having an agenda for your day, practicing mindfulness. Is if I have an agenda and my child needs something and I'm holding on to that agenda really hard, I'm not being flexible and I'm not being fully present. because I'm wishing my circumstances were something different than my actual present state. So it's vital that you have an agenda, but it has to be held loosely to accommodate things that are unexpected. We don't want to hold on to an agenda in a rigid manner.
Tell that to my son. My son is 8 years old, and he's one of those kids, like, if you tell him, okay, we're gonna do this at 10 a.m., like, if it's like 5 minutes off, he'll like say it, like, hey, you said this is at 10, like. But because I used to be like that. I was very rigid, and then over the years, I'm like, okay, people are not going to want to work with me if I'm like so rigid like that on the schedule. So I love that, flexible in the mind, flexible in the schedule, and I think we'll probably be a little less anxious and
That's right.
stressed out.
Less stressed, yeah.
What about like flexibility as far as, I'm just sort of fatigued right now, I want to go exercise, or I'm going to go for a walk, or just getting away, because like Zoom fatigue is a real thing for a lot of people. Like, you're staring at a screen or you're sitting all day. Like, do you build in true physical flexibility into your day too?
Yeah, I think that's really wise, because if you are fatigued or wearing yourself out, you're not productive. You're just not as productive. So if you take a little bit of time and give yourself a break, maybe you go sit on the couch and close your eyes. Maybe you go practice some breathing. Maybe you go take the dog outside, whatever it might be, or you go play a quick game of Yahtzee with your kid, whatever it might be.
That sounds awesome.
Yeah, you re-energize, and then you can actually accomplish more in less time. So it's not really the time that we're spending, it's the quality and how we're using it.
Yeah. Okay. Big question here, because I like to ask people this, because there's a lot of parents listening to this podcast. This is hard, honestly. If you're working at home and you have kids at home and you're trying to figure out a way to do school virtually, what tips do you have there? Especially in a way that's not disruptive to the work that you're trying to do. And at the end of the day, we don't want to get stressed out, and we don't want to fully blend work and life. We want to be there 100% in both areas. But what tips do you have to make sure that, we could be there for our kids when we need them, but it's also not going to disrupt our work?
Yeah, I think the first is to change our expectations. We're not able to be 100% in both areas at the very same time.
At the same time,
I know we have to be. I homeschool my child, and I've been doing it since he's 11 now. So I know all about trying to manage both. And you have to get creative. You have to look at the personality of the child and see how can you communicate to your children what you need and what you expect of them that's realistic and age appropriate. For my kid, he's been hearing a lot about, okay, we must be flexible, and this is going to be your agenda while I'm doing this, because I cannot be interrupted. But he knows when he can interrupt me when I'm not doing anything that's so significant I can't be interrupted. Maybe I'm doing paperwork or something, he can come in. So he has very clear idea of the boundaries, when he can approach me and come into my office and when he cannot. And I also make sure he's very clear on what he needs to be doing during that time frame. It could be I put him on a subject where he can be more self-sufficient. He's not going to need my help, so he can direct and guide himself. So it could be looking at that and saying, what can I do to schedule that time where, my child can learn on his or her own while I'm doing the heavy stuff at work, for example.
So last question I have for you, and we can wrap up, is just about connection in general. So for me, I consider myself more of an introvert. I don't think I show up that way to people, but like I need to recharge in an isolated manner. I need quiet space. I need to be able to get lost in my thoughts, all that. However, in not being able to connect with people except for through a screen, I find myself having a hard time. And I know those who are extroverts are having a really, really hard time right now. They're probably bouncing off the walls. Looking at people through Zoom or any other video chat is not the same as actually connecting with somebody in person. There's like body language, there's energy that you get from somebody. It's just, it can feel isolated and make people lonely. What tips do you have for people when you're working from home and you wish there was more connection with people?
Well, I like that you're talking about the difference between introverts and extroverts, because this year I think has been tough on both. We're feeling that disconnect from people because we don't have that social contact that both introverts and extroverts need, just maybe in different amounts. For introverts, I think, finding time, sometime in your day, according to your own schedule, of being able to decompress and really process what's going on in your life. Just kind of doing some activity that you find meaningful, whether it be artistic or a hobby, or some people are exercising, those kinds of things. Getting in nature actually is really helpful for everyone, just to getting outside, going into your yard or for a walk in the park, whatever situation allows, wherever you're at. And extroverts too need to do what they can to monitor their own needs.
Yeah.
And to really know for themselves, how much time do I need to spend, being in front of the computer on Zoom, because it's not a perfect situation and there's no way to really make it perfect. We have to just make some adjustments and live a little bit longer like this. But I think the most important thing is that we know what we need and we give ourselves permission to do that.
I lied. I have one more question for you.
Okay.
I was thinking about it because we were talking about gratitude earlier and documenting it. But in asking you the question about connecting with other people, I'm curious if you ever make time to show gratitude to another person or appreciation or recognition in a way to connect with other people.
I think that's a great way. We can start in our home. We're talking about boundaries and managing family and work at the same time. And that's a great place to start, really showing your family, thank you so much for allowing me to work. Thank you so much for allowing me to have this quiet space. Thank you for not bothering me while I'm on a conference call. I really appreciate what you did. We can start in our home and you can really observe how that affects your loved ones. It's huge.
Yeah.
It's huge. And, when we show gratitude, it helps us feel more connected to people. So yeah, even like colleagues and stuff, we've done that just in my personal circle, really are showing appreciation for one another.
Cindy, I really appreciate you coming on the Transform Your Workplace podcast. Your book is Rockin Life From Home, Successful Strategies to Balance Family Life and Working From Home. Just appreciate you in the whole conversation. This is really important stuff. A lot of people are struggling right now. I struggle at times and I like to talk about it. And that's why, I wanted you on, and I have other people on that, share similar ideas as you, but it can add stuff in a lot of different ways. And this is just I just want to keep talking about it because people need help and employees need help. So just thank you. Where can people find your book or more about you or anything that you're up to?
Well, the book is on Amazon, and you can also go to my website, which is cindybakerlifedesign.com. to find out some more information. That's probably the best way to reach me.
Awesome. And I just wanted to mention that you have a great blog too. Lots of great topics on there that are really helpful. So good tips if people want to dive deep and learn more about what Cindy's up to.
Thank you.
So Cindy, thanks again for coming on. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. I enjoyed it.